Greetings again. This is Jace Hargis, and I'm back for part two of a two-part series on this mobile learning professional development model. As you'll recall, in the first one, I shared with you the 4 parts, which would be the I Champions, the I Celebrate, the I Communicate, and the I Sodal. So what I'm going to do next is basically walk through the findings of the part of the 10 scholarly papers that we were able to write and publish. So the mobile learning research outcomes really comes as I mentioned in the iSodal in the previous session, lots and lots of data, people collecting data, trying to figure out whether, does it work? Does it work? Do we have? Is it doing what we needed to do? Which, if you'll remember, was the whole point of engagement, and engagement would then be detected by how do we measure engagement. You'll see that that was a really big point. We wanted to make sure that when everything was said and done, we were able to say yes or no, we met our goals. I'll run through a series of about 3 or 4 papers here and try to walk through fairly quickly, but at the same time slow enough to where we can make some sense of this. But the first paper that we were able to publish was on the Mobile Learning Initiative. It was a triangulation of the data. It's in the Journal of Journal of Innovative Higher Education. And we thought we would find a way to basically look at the data in 3 different ways. So find a way to see if when we look at it through 3 distinctively different ways, do we come up with the same conclusion. So the first thing we did was we worked on this whole idea of trying to do some interviews. We had a trained, experienced clinical person who come in and talk to the faculty themselves and gather some information about what they know about mobile learning and what their perception was before, during, and after. So this took place pretty much during the first month of implementation. A colleague and I basically then went through and we developed a classroom observation device. This was a modification of a known device and modifying it for interaction, activity, engagement, all we know works well in a classroom inside of a classroom that was using these mobile devices. We sat there together at the same time, both having iPads, having an online Google document that we worked with, a Google form, and we evaluated this. The third of the triangulation was this concept of these faculty pillars. So we basically developed these 4 models, as I related to at the very beginning. The SAMR model, which is Ruben Puntendera's model of the substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, I'll speak about in a moment. 21st century skills, a social, mobile, society, kind of a media model, and then the TPACK skills, which would be, the model, TPACK being the technology, pedagogy, and the content knowledge. That again I'll speak with in just a moment. Using all 3 of these, we were able to triangulate this information and came out with the following conclusion, which was basically that we did see engaged learners in meaningful use of mobile learning, and all of our aspects did support this social, collaborative, active, dynamic environment. The second paper that we were able to publish was basically this concept of measuring the difficult to measure. It's in the International Journal of Mobile and Blended Learning. And the whole point here was we wanted to try to take a look at both dispositional, survey, but we really wanted to try to find a way to look at some real-time data and what we would refer to as direct measurements. So we did some interviews, we did some case studies, we took some of the faculty members kind of across the board and took individual times and places of where they thought worked, didn't work. We ran this SWOT analysis that you can see many of the components down the table below. We did a dispositional survey of both the students and the faculty to see how they felt about this. But one of the most powerful, I believe, data points was that during the first week that we were running this, I basically opened up this Basecamp project management site, and I asked for the iChampions across the country to share with everybody on this Basecamp the real-time evaluation of what was working, what wasn't working, how things were going. So this gave us some nice direct measurement of concrete analysis that I then synthesized and came up and basically categorized in one of these 4 categories. So the strengths that we saw obviously were lots and lots of engagement. The faculty, of course, were engaged. The students were doing some things that they had not done previously, as far as getting out of the classroom, taking pictures, movies, creating products and artifacts, challenge-based learning. All of it was fairly new, but all of it was very easy to do because they had the tools to now do it with. Great tech support. The one good thing about the TPACK model is that we did look at the technology ahead of time and realized that there just wasn't a lot of technology support that was needed. Everything simply worked. A few minor problems, but really nothing that we couldn't fix locally. And we did have this extensive digital repository that we found. We started to create. You'll see this is both the strength and the weakness in the next section. We did, as far as weaknesses, we did have to look for something that we thought might happen, which was the students' perception of what tablets and iPads and these mobile learning devices were all about. They were thinking of them as movies and games. We did a bit of a recalibration in trying to help them see them as a learning tool. And then secondly, as you might imagine, we had a lot of problems with, where are we going to store these products and artifacts? We were so quick in deployment, we didn't have the back end fixed, but the good news about this is that it did encourage us to get a system-wide, easily accessible storage for this. Initially we used Dropbox and Box and some of the cloud storages, but now we have this as well as our students are creating apps, teachers are creating apps, and more of these ebooks and resources are being created. Opportunities, it gave lots of opportunities for collaboration, which we saw in the iCelebrate. It continued on through. We had people talking within disciplines that had never talked to each other but realized they were doing much of the same thing. It increased our pedagogical support internally. We still didn't bring a lot of external people in to work, but faculty felt like they had a lot more PD this year than they had in previous years. And we were able to expand and start to have rich discussions about how we might evaluate using some systematic qualitative and quantitative rubrics to assess these performance-based artifacts and project bases that we were starting to create from the students. And finally, the threats that happened, we still see that there was a bit of a lagging paradigm, as we're seeing still in the literature, that the way that we assess things don't always go hand in hand and in parallel with the way that we want to develop this. The richer, more subjective artifacts are sometimes difficult to assess accurately, so we're working with that. And finally, and the big elephant in the room is basically we still don't have enough truly interactive digital content to bring all of this to life, but we know that will be forthcoming. The next paper, the third of 4 papers that I'll basically share, is this idea of these models that we used. I mentioned the SAMR model, basically that we used throughout. We did publish a paper to show the movement from substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition in basically 6 months, a year total. You can see some of the movement that we had, and it's published in the Journal of Interactive Technology and Smart Education. I won't go through a lot of this data. We did do a statistical analysis. You can see some of the p-values there, and you know that basically the lower the p-value shows some statistical, true statistical differences. We did see a lot of difference basically in the empowerment of the faculty and this pedagogical knowledge that they were able to incorporate. We did see quite a bit in movement from a very basic write-read applications into more discipline specifics, which we were hoping to see. And then, of course, some practical significance in media and using some of the apps for different things, and obviously using them for some more advanced pedagogical knowledge. So we really were pleased with this movement more quickly than we had thought, and more substantial, more rich than we had hoped for. So we were pleased with this progress. The last basically movement that I'll talk about is this idea of the SAMR model going from one to the next. We did see some substantial differences quickly into the substitution, and then beyond that up into modifications. So we saw probably one of our largest jumps from 20 to 30% or so into the modification range. And this is really what we were headed for, this idea of transforming the learning by using this tool. So we saw some modification of using these tools in ways and increasing some learning in ways that we couldn't have normally done it without it. So this was just one model that we used. We're going to be using some other ones in the future, but we really were pleased with how this worked out. Thank you very much for your time and interest. I'll be creating some more of these, and I look forward and hope that you have some time to continue to listen. This is Jace Hargis.